June 4th, 1942. 07:18 a.m. North Pacific Ocean, 300 miles northwest of Midway Atoll. The sea is calm, too calm. Petty Officer Kenji Sato grips the railing of the Japanese heavy cruiser Tone, squinting through the pale morning haze. Salt wind presses against his face, cool and sharp. Below him, the ocean stretches empty, a flat, steel-blue mirror broken only by the slow wake of the fleet. This is not what victory looks like. Just hours earlier, Japanese aircraft had struck American targets at Midway. Reports crackled over radios. Enemy airfields damaged, resistance disorganized. The plan, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's grand design, was unfolding as intended. And yet, something feels wrong. Sato lowers his binoculars, then raises them again. There, on the horizon, a shape, low, flat-topped. Another. His breath catches. Kobo, he whispers, aircraft carrier. That can't be right. Those ships were hit weeks ago, damaged, burned, sent limping back to Pearl Harbor. Everyone knows what it takes to repair a carrier. Months in dry dock, thousands of workers, steel replaced plate by plate. American carriers do not simply reappear. But there they are, clearer now. Flight decks visible through the haze, dark specks moving across them, aircraft being readied. Alive. Operational. Impossible. The order comes down the line in clipped, controlled tones. No panic, no disbelief allowed. But it's already there, spreading silently among the men. The Americans are back. Too fast. Far too fast. In the Japanese Navy, time is understood as a weapon. Damage inflicted equals time gained. Time gained equals strategic advantage. That is doctrine. That is certainty. At Pearl Harbor, 6 months earlier, the Imperial Navy shattered the U.S. Pacific Fleet precisely to buy time. Time to secure territory, time to fortify, time to make American recovery slow and painful. Carriers were precious. Fragile. Complex. Hit one badly enough, and it disappears from the war for half a year. At least, that was the assumption. Sato watches deck crews move with rehearsed precision on the distant American ships. Planes are being fueled, armed, launched. Not patched together. Not limping. Fully alive. You can almost feel the question settling over the Japanese fleet like fog. How did they come back so soon? Messages fly between flagships. Intelligence officers scramble. Calculations are redone in hurried pencil strokes. Someone has misjudged something. And in war, misjudgments kill. To understand the shock on Sato's face, you have to understand what Japanese commanders believed about American industry in 1941 and early 1942. They knew the United States was wealthy. They knew it was large. But they believed it was slow. A nation of committees and contracts, of politics and distance. A nation that could build, yes, but not quickly, not under fire. That belief shaped everything. Hit hard, hit first. Force negotiations before American momentum wakes up. But standing on the deck of the Tone that morning, watching carriers that should still be in dry dock prepare for battle, Sato realizes something terrifying. The Americans didn't wake up slowly. They woke up already running. The sea erupts with noise. Engines scream overhead. Japanese fighters roar into the sky. Anti-aircraft guns swing into position. The battle is beginning. Not as planned, but as reality demands. And in that moment, Japanese sailors are no longer fighting an enemy they understand. They are fighting a system that repairs faster than assumptions allow. Sato's binoculars tremble slightly in his hands. He isn't afraid of the planes. He's afraid of the implication. Because if American carriers can be repaired in weeks instead of months, then every calculation made since Pearl Harbor is wrong. Every sacrifice. Every victory. Every timeline. Wrong. As the first bombs fall and the sky fills with contrails, the realization tightens its grip. The enemy is not just across the ocean. The enemy is time itself, and it no longer favors Japan. And somewhere beyond the horizon, unseen shipyards and factories are already preparing the next surprise. The first reports come in fragmented bursts. Pilots landing hard on pitching decks. Signal flags snapping in the wind. Voices strained but disciplined. Enemy carriers confirmed. Flight operations ongoing. Damage minimal. Minimal. That word ripples through the command staff like a cold wave. Rear Admiral Tamaki Ugaki, Yamamoto's chief of staff aboard the battleship Yamato, listens in silence as the messages accumulate. He says nothing at first. He doesn't need to. The implication is already clear. These carriers were supposed to be out of the war. Weeks earlier, Japanese intelligence had tracked American flat-ups limping away from previous engagements. Smoke, fires, flooded compartments. Everything suggested long repair cycles. In Japanese naval doctrine, a carrier was not a thing you quickly fixed. It was a cathedral of steel, complex, delicate, and dependent on skilled labor that could not be rushed. Japan's own carriers had proven that. Even minor damage meant months of repair. So why are the Americans here? Ugaki flips through damage assessments again. He stares at the dates. The math refuses to cooperate. On the flight deck of the Tone, Sato feels the change before it's spoken. Orders become sharper. Voices drop. No one jokes. The enemy is not behaving according to expectation, and that unnerves even veterans. A petty officer beside him mutters, "They should still be burning." No one corrects him. What Japanese commanders are confronting in real time is not a tactical surprise. It is a structural one. They believe the United States fought wars the way it built ships in peacetime. Slow. Careful. Linear. But the carriers appearing off Midway reveal something else entirely. Emergency repair protocols, round-the-clock shipyard shifts, pre-positioned steel, modular components, civilian yards converted overnight to naval production. None of this is visible from the deck of a cruiser, but its effect is unmistakable. The Americans have compressed time. Ugaki finally speaks. "Then we proceed," he says quietly. There is no alternative, but behind the calm tone is something new: uncertainty. Because every plan rests on assumptions, and one of theirs has just collapsed. The sky fills with aircraft. American dive bombers peel downward like falling knives. Japanese fighters claw upward to meet them. The air is chaos, contrails crossing, tracers stitching empty space. Sato watches planes vanish into clouds and does not see them return. Losses mount. Yet still, the carriers remain. Still launching. Still recovering. Still fighting. Between attack waves, officers gather around updated plots. The American carriers shift position rapidly, maneuvering with confidence, not caution. This is not a wounded opponent. This is a machine that has already healed. And healed fast. Japanese planners had gambled everything on the idea that early blows would create strategic breathing room. Instead, those blows have revealed the enemy's true strength. Not armor. Not guns. But the ability to absorb damage and return. Quickly. That ability changes everything. Because it means every strike must now count. There may not be a second chance. Late in the morning, Sato hears a sound he has never heard before. Laughter. Nervous. Disbelieving. An officer shakes his head, staring at the horizon. "They come back like ghosts," he says. "We hit them and they return." No one laughs again. The realization spreads quietly through the fleet. Even when you hurt them, the Americans do not disappear. They reappear. Faster each time. And as the battle grinds on, one truth becomes harder to ignore. Japan is fighting an enemy whose strength grows after being hit. As smoke thickens and the ocean churns with wreckage, the question hangs unanswered. If American carriers can be back in weeks, what happens when Japan finally loses one? The battle scatters. Smoke drifts across the sea in ragged curtains. Burning fuel slicks the water. Aircraft fall in spirals, some trailing flame, some vanishing silently into the gray. By early afternoon, The outcome at Midway is no longer in doubt. Japanese carriers are burning. American carriers are still moving. Petty Officer Sato watches the fires consume Akagi from a distance, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed. The heat is visible even across the water, black smoke punching upward like a signal flare to the gods. This is what carrier damage is supposed to look like. Total, crippling, final. And yet, the American ships remain. That contradiction gnaws at him. Hours later, as the surviving Japanese ships withdraw, the radio fills with reports from elsewhere in the Pacific. American carriers damaged earlier in the year, ships the Japanese believed neutralized, are not sitting idle. They are training, refitting, returning. Fast. The truth begins to crystallize, piece by piece. The United States does not treat damage as a pause. It treats it as a process. At Pearl Harbor, dry docks run day and night. Floodlights turn darkness into artificial noon. Civilians and sailors work side by side, 12-hour shifts blurring into one another. Hull plates are cut away and replaced in sections, not whole. Wiring is rerouted instead of rebuilt. Damage control officers document every hit, not to mourn it, but to standardize the fix. Time saved becomes doctrine. One carrier, scorched and battered, is declared fit for combat not when it is perfect, but when it is good enough. That philosophy is alien to Japanese naval thinking, but it works. Within weeks, the implications reach Tokyo. Naval staff review timelines again, they adjust expectations, they shorten estimates. Then they shorten them again. Each revision is worse than the last. The Americans are not just repairing ships. They are learning how to repair faster every time. Sato learns of this secondhand, through hushed conversations and intercepted signals. The enemy is building momentum, not in the number of ships alone, but in the speed of recovery. Damage no longer removes an American carrier from the war, it merely delays its next appearance. And the delay is shrinking. The contrast is brutal. Japan's own carriers, when damaged, must travel thousands of miles to limited facilities. Skilled labor is scarce. Materials are rationed. Every repair competes with new construction. There is no slack, no surge capacity. When a Japanese carrier burns, it is not just a ship lost, it is time lost. Irreplaceable time. By late 1942, the pattern is undeniable. American carriers rotate in and out of combat like pieces on a board. One takes damage. Another fills the gap. The damaged one returns sooner than expected. The cycle tightens. Sato, now stationed farther south, watches American carrier groups appear where none should be. Reports always begin the same way. Enemy carriers sighted. Always sooner than predicted. Always sooner than planned for. The Japanese Navy begins to understand something deeply unsettling. This war will not be decided by who strikes hardest first. It will be decided by who can recover fastest. And in that contest, the Americans are accelerating. Late one night, as Sato stands watch beneath a starless sky, he thinks back to Midway, to the moment he first saw carriers that should not exist. At the time, it felt like bad intelligence. Bad luck. Now, he understands. It was a preview, a glimpse of a future where every American loss is temporary, and every Japanese loss is permanent. The ocean is quiet, but somewhere beyond the darkness, steel is being cut. Welds are cooling. Decks are being cleared for flight. And soon, far sooner than expected, the carriers will return again. By early 1943, the Japanese Navy stops being surprised. That may be the most dangerous change of all. Surprise can shock. Shock can motivate. But resignation settles in quietly and stays. Petty Officer Sato feels it during briefings, the way officers no longer argue over whether American carriers will appear, only how soon. Timetables that once allowed months now allow weeks, sometimes days. The ocean has become unreliable. After Midway, Japanese planners had hoped the disaster was an exception, a perfect storm of bad timing, missed opportunities, and chance. But the pattern refuses to fade. American carrier task forces strike the Solomon Islands. Withdraw. Return. Strike again. Guadalcanal becomes a proving ground, not just of courage, but of endurance. And endurance favors the side that can repair, refit, and return without pause. Sato hears the names repeated like omens. Enterprise. Saratoga. Hornet. Ships that should be ghosts. Ships that keep coming back. Each time, faster. Each time, more confident. Japanese commanders begin to adjust tactics, but tactics cannot compensate for velocity. The Americans rotate carriers through combat like a relay team. One task force absorbs damage. Another fills the gap. The damaged ship slips away, not to disappear, but to prepare its return. For Japan, there is no relay. There are only fewer ships. At Rabaul, Japanese pilots wait on airstrips carved from jungle. Fuel is rationed. Spare parts are cannibalized. Aircraft that should be grounded are kept flying through sheer necessity. Across the ocean, American pilots land on flight decks that were scorched weeks earlier, decks already repaired, repainted, restriped. The contrast is impossible to ignore. In staff meetings, officers speak more openly now. The Americans are not replacing carriers, one says quietly. They are rotating them. The distinction matters. Replacement implies loss. Rotation implies continuity. Sato witnesses the consequences firsthand during a nighttime alert. American aircraft arrive sooner than expected. Again. The radar warning is short. The scramble frantic. Anti-aircraft fire claws at the sky, but the attackers are already positioned. Bombs fall. The fleet survives. Barely. And as the smoke clears, the realization settles deeper. The Americans are setting the tempo. They decide when the fight happens. They decide when it pauses. Japan is reacting. Always reacting. By mid-1943, even victories feel hollow. An American carrier is damaged. Cheers ripple briefly through the ranks. Then the inevitable question follows. How long until it returns? No one answers. Because the answer keeps getting shorter. Sato writes a letter home that night. He does not describe battles. He does not describe fear. He writes about time. About how the war feels like trying to outrun a tide that learns your speed and adjusts. About how the enemy seems to grow stronger each time it is tested. He never sends the letter. There is no censorship rule against pessimism. But there is something worse. There is the fear of being right. The Japanese Navy had trained for decisive battles, singular moments of destruction that would tilt the war. What they are facing instead is a war of persistence. A war where damage is temporary for one side and permanent for the other. A war where industrial rhythm matters more than heroism. Sato stands on deck one evening as the sun sinks into the Pacific. The horizon is empty. For now, he knows better than to trust it. Because somewhere beyond that line, American carriers are repairing, refueling, reorganizing, preparing to return. And when they do, it won't feel like an invasion. It will feel like inevitability. The balance has already shifted. The question is no longer if Japan can win. It is how long it can endure a war where the enemy never stays down. By late 1944, the idea of waiting out the enemy no longer exists. There is no waiting, only bracing. Petty Officer Kenji Sato stands on the deck of a transport ship moving through the Philippine Sea, watching the horizon the way a man watches a wound that refuses to close. The ocean is gray and restless. The sky feels heavy, not with storm clouds, but with expectation. They all feel it now. When American carriers vanish, it does not mean they are gone. It means they are turning around. The Japanese Navy once believed that damage imposed a natural rhythm on war. Strike, withdraw, recover, return. That rhythm is gone. American carriers are no longer part of a cycle. They are part of a flow. Hit one, and another fills the space. Damage another, and the first one is already on its way back. The system absorbs shock without slowing, and Japan cannot. Sato hears the truth in the quiet moments, in conversations that trail off, in officers staring too long at charts they no longer trust. Fuel shortages bite harder now. Training hours shrink. Pilots fly fewer sorties before being sent into combat anyway. There is no margin left. The American carriers, meanwhile, appear in greater numbers, operating farther west than ever before. They are not cautious. They are confident. At Leyte Gulf, the final confirmation arrives. The largest naval battle in history erupts across multiple seas. Japanese forces gamble everything on one last decisive engagement. It is a gamble built on desperation. And desperation is slow. American carriers absorb losses, reconfigure, and continue operations almost immediately. Damaged flight decks are patched between strikes. Aircraft are rerouted. Task groups shift without pause. The Japanese plan depends on timing that no longer exists. The enemy is always ready sooner than expected. Sato watches American planes swarm the sky, wave after wave, disciplined and relentless. He doesn't count aircraft anymore. He counts minutes. Minutes between attacks. Minutes between reappearances. Minutes that used to stretch into weeks. Now they barely exist. By the final year of the war, Japanese sailors no longer ask how long American carriers will be gone. They ask something else. Which one will return first? The question alone says everything. Sato remembers Midway, the calm sea, the impossible silhouettes on the horizon. The first crack in an assumption that had shaped an empire's strategy. At the time, it felt like a shock. Now, it feels like a warning that was ignored. The truth becomes impossible to escape. Japan did not lose the carrier war because it lacked courage, or skill, or discipline. It lost because every carrier it damaged represented lost time it could not replace, while every American carrier damaged represented temporary inconvenience. The Americans did not just build ships. They built a system that expected damage, planned for it, and returned faster because of it. A system where loss was not a stopping point, but a step. As the war grinds toward its end, Sato watches American carriers move freely across seas that once felt contested. Their presence is constant now, predictable in its inevitability. The reappearance that once shocked him has become the new normal, and that realization carries its own weight. Years later, historians will debate battles, commanders, and tactics. They will argue over decisions made in moments of chaos. But Sato understands something simpler. The war was decided not when carriers sank, but when damaged carriers came back too fast to matter. When time itself switched sides. On his final night at sea, Saito leans against the railing, listening to the water slide past the hull. The horizon is dark. But he knows better now. Somewhere beyond it, American carriers are already there, or on their way back. They always are. And that is the lesson the Japanese Navy learned too late. Not in a single battle, but over weeks that felt like days, and repairs that should have taken months, but didn't. The enemy was never just the ships. It was the speed at which they refused to stay gone. By the beginning of 1945, the Pacific feels smaller. Not because the ocean has changed, but because American carriers are everywhere. Petty Officer Kenji Sato no longer reacts when reports come in. Enemy carriers detected. Enemy carriers approaching. Enemy carriers launching strikes. The words have lost their shock. They have become routine. That is the final transformation of the war, when what once felt impossible becomes expected. Sato stands on the deck of a battered Japanese transport ship, watching the horizon at dawn. The sea is calm, pale gray under a low sky. There are fewer ships around him now. The formations are thinner. The confidence is gone. No one asks where the American carriers are. They ask which direction they'll come from. The distinction matters. The Japanese Navy has learned the truth too late. Early in the war, commanders believed time was something they could control, something they could steal with surprise attacks and decisive blows. Pearl Harbor was meant to buy years. Midway was meant to secure dominance. Instead, each blow revealed something Japan had never truly accounted for. The United States did not treat damage as defeat. It treated it as feedback. Every damaged carrier returned faster than the last. Every repair cycle shortened. Every lesson absorbed and applied. By the end, American carriers didn't disappear after being hit. They slipped out of sight and came back stronger. Japan could not do the same. When a Japanese carrier was lost, it stayed lost. When aircrews were destroyed, their experience vanished with them. Shipyards lacked materials. Fuel shortages slowed everything. Skilled labor thinned. Time, once thought manageable, became the enemy. And time had chosen its side. Sato thinks back to Midway again, to that first impossible morning. At the time, he believed he was witnessing an error. Bad intelligence. A fluke. Now he understands. It was the moment the war quietly tilted, not with an explosion, but with a realization that the enemy could absorb punishment without slowing. By the final months, American carrier groups move freely across seas that once felt contested. Their presence is constant, methodical, assured. They do not rush. They do not need to. The system behind them is complete. Factories feed shipyards. Shipyards feed fleets. Fleets rotate without pause. Damage no longer disrupts the rhythm. It is built into it. Sato watches American aircraft pass overhead one last time. He doesn't curse them. He doesn't shake his fist. He simply watches. Because now he understands what the Japanese Navy learned too late. Wars are not won by the first strike. They are won by who can recover the fastest, by who can lose and return anyway. Long after the guns fall silent, historians will debate strategies and decisions. But the lesson is simple. Japan did not lose the carrier war when its ships burned. It lost when American carriers came back too fast for damage to matter. When time itself stopped being neutral. When endurance defeated brilliance. Sato leans against the railing as the ship cuts through the water. The horizon is empty, but he knows better now. Somewhere beyond it, American carriers are already moving. They always are. And that is the lesson learned too late, not in a single battle, but in the weeks that felt like days, and the repairs that should have taken months, but didn't.